quarry located in Australia is definitely not for the faint of heart, and let's talk about a follower's very terrifying experience there. This quarry was located kind of near their home, and they and their entire family were just kind of walking around it one day trying to figure out a way in. And as they're walking, the follower looks up at their mom and is like, I wonder if this place is haunted, because they are just starting to get in touch with their spiritual abilities. They have, some gifts that they're trying to figure out at this point, and they just got that feeling and kind of blurted it out. And the mom was like, oh, it's definitely haunted. And the follower did go on to say that they felt like people did lose their lives here, but those weren't really the energies staying around. So they get into the quarry and they're walking around, and something just tells the follower to make a little rock circle and draw a little protection sigil in it, like just their gut feeling. So they do that and they continue walking around. They find an interesting branch on their walk laying on the ground that kind of looks like a ram's head, and despite their kind of phobia that they have of dirt, mud, and grime, they walk over to that branch and pick it up out of the dirt and carry it, which is weird that they would even be comfortable doing that because they don't like dirt. So at this point, they're all heading back to the car, and the follower kind of notices that they've slowed down significantly, to the point that their family is around 100 meters away getting into the car. So as they're noticing how far behind they are, they also notice that something feels a bit off with them. They notice an incredibly uncomfortable feeling on their chest and on their back. And without turning around, they open up that mind's eye and see exactly what's behind them. It's a very tall, very dark, hunched over figure just inches away from their back. Angry that they were even there, angry that they drew that sigil, angry that they took the branch, or maybe just angry that they weren't even scared. Regardless, mad. Without turning around and out loud, they say, "You are not following me home." It stops here. And this entity's kind of taken aback. Definitely never gotten that sort of response before. So after they give their clear message, they carry on to the car, bring their stick with them, and later burn that stick in a bonfire. They said they've never returned, but every time they drive past it on their route to work, they get a really bad feeling. During winter break in 2022, a follower and their family make a 26-hour drive from SoCal to Ravensdale, Washington. And they do this to spend the winter break with the follower's aunt. So they arrive at literally 1 in the morning and go straight to bed, and I don't blame them one bit for that. So they get up the next morning and they and their brother decide to explore the woods surrounding their aunt's home. So they're out minding their business looking for cool rocks when they find an abandoned train track. Upon further investigation, it is not just a train track, it is a train that seems to be abandoned and it is covered in graffiti. They're wandering around it minding their business when they hear a very distinct thud. This thud sounds like someone threw a rock and it bounced off of the train. Well, they're looking around and there's no one. Also, this noise came from their right, and to their right is nary a train, just woods. So it would have been right in front of them and they would have seen it happen. So they carry on with their day and they hear it again. They take note that it's sounding the exact same, it sounds like someone threw it the exact same way. So a bad feeling bubbles up in their stomach and they're like, okay, I need to get us out of here, but I need to keep my brother calm. They look down at their brother and they're like, hey, our aunt would really like this rock. We should run now and go show it to her. And it works, and they get out of the woods. Every single night that they were at their aunt's house, they felt like they were being watched as they slept right underneath a skylight. So whenever I think about the Canadian prairies, my first thought is never terror. I always think it's a peaceful, beautiful place, but apparently it is quite horrifying, so let's get into it. I want to share with you guys a terribly unfortunate encounter that a follower had while driving to work one night. So they work the night shift. It's around 5:30 p.m., but it's winter time, so it is completely dark. They're driving down the road to get to their job with their dog in the back seat, and they have their windows down. As they roll up to the only stop sign that they encounter on their journey to work, they hear some sort of scratching. They assume it's a deer or a moose or something and are immediately on alert because they are terrified of encountering any of these with their car, which I completely understand. But they notice that their dog, who usually barks at these types of animals, is not making a sound. So they turn and look at their dog and see their dog locked in on the tree line beside of them. The dog is not barking, but it is growling, like a low growl, which is abnormal for their dog. So immediately they're like, what's going on? They turn down the radio and start listening, and they hear what sounds like a faint whistle, but again, it could have been a deer, could have been a moose, could have been the wind. Then their dog lets out a blood-curdling yelp and leaps to the other side of the back seat to get away from that tree line. So as they're turning to check on their dog, they see something out of the corner of their eye at that tree line. They see a very skinny being that's very tall and gray charging towards their car, like faster than any animal they have ever seen move. Thankfully, they sped away just in time and got to work safely and never took that way again. What's going on in the prairies, guys? Are we okay there? What's this? Julia spent all of last summer working in the woods of Connecticut, and I mean, she was in the woods at night, she was swimming at night, she was doing all these things without a care in the world, and luckily nothing happened. No creepy sightings, no hearing things she shouldn't, no seeing things she shouldn't, everything was fine. But unfortunately, that good luck would not follow her back home to Poland. Julia was very close with her grandfather when he was alive, and even after his passing, she remains close as she visits his cemetery often. Her grandfather actually passed away 10 years prior, and almost every single week when it's warm, she would walk to the cemetery because it's like a 10-15 minute walk from her house. So on this particular day, it was no different except for the time. She actually went a little bit later. It was like 7 p.m. But she was like, I know when the sun goes down, I know I have like an hour of daylight left. I'm just going to go sit by his grave, chat with him, and then come home. So the walk there was fine, but the second she stepped foot onto that hollow ground, something was wrong. And the feelings that she felt were not normal to feel at this cemetery. This was her safe place. It's where she talked to her grandfather. This was not normal. She ignored it. She was like, I already walked from my house. I am just going to go sit with him for a bit and everything will be fine. So she sits down by him and every hair on her body's already rising and the temperature starts changing. And she's like, okay, I can't focus. Obviously, I am not supposed to be here. Something is telling me I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe it's my grandfather trying to save me. I'm going to get up and walk home. So that's exactly what she does. As she's walking, she heads down the exact same path that she came from, and that's when she sees it. The only thing that she could use to describe what she saw was that it was a giant man. Giant in every sense of the word. And I'm using man loosely because this thing was not human. This thing began coming right for her, so she turned in a different direction and went. She only ran for a second before she turned around and looked, and this thing was gone. There was nowhere it could have hid. She would have heard it run. There was nothing. It was just gone, out of thin air. So of course I read this, and I don't really know much about Poland folklore, or the legends or cryptids there, or anything like that, so I nosedived into some research, and obviously I have no idea. I am not an expert on Poland folklore, and I do not claim to be. This is just all from Google, from stuff I read. But I'm not going to say it because I don't want to like mess up the pronunciation. I don't know if it's bad luck to say the name, but I found this. If anyone is from Poland or well versed in the folklore there, you can tell me. I'm probably so wrong, but that was the only thing I found in Poland that kind of fit the description that she described to me. I did reach out asking if the descriptions look similar. To my full knowledge, she hasn't responded yet. I will check again. But yeah, if there's anything else lurking around the wilderness of Poland, let me know. But that was like the only thing I could find. And I know not everything's online, but involving stuff like online, that was the closest thing I could find. But y'all got scary stuff in Poland. I was terrified researching. Something that I feel like is kind of overlooked when you're talking about Appalachian folklore is the knocking and the tapping that is heard on windows, walls, doors. And I'm actually going to make a whole video about that this weekend because it deserves its own video. But I have a story kind of involving that from West Virginia, so we're going to read it together. My then boyfriend, now fiance, lives in a super small town in West Virginia. I went to visit him August of 2023 because I hadn't been to visit him yet, and it was basically a straight shot through Appalachia/New England area to my university in Canada. I heard a lot about the precautions to take while there, and I followed them as best as I could with what I knew. I try not to think about things or keep them in the front of my mind as I tend to overreact to things if I'm thinking about them. I shared a room with him for the first week I was down there, and things were good. I have insomnia, and starting the second week, it hit. I've never had hallucinations when struggling with sleep. I've only had them when my chronic fatigue was acting up and I was actively fighting sleep. It's just as horrible to live with both of these as it sounds. One night it was raining and no windows were open, and I made sure his curtains were closed. I was just on my phone when I heard the tapping on the window. There was only one window close to us, and the other window was out in the living room to our left. This tapping was very obviously coming from the other window below our feet. My first mistake happened when I stopped my video and listened. I wanted to make sure it wasn't their dog or something that accidentally got let out. She's a really short dog though, so she would have never been able to reach. I heard it again and immediately got filled with ice-cold dread in my body, despite not thinking anything strange of it. I turned my video off and then forced myself to go to sleep, which luckily happened soon after. Next night, before it got dark, I had my fiance check to see if any branches were outside the window, which we confirmed were not. We kept the windows closed and blinds drawn, went to bed, and it happened again, right around the same time too. I again laid there, but my fiance opened the blinds since it woke him up and he saw nothing. He went back to sleep and I sat there paranoid when it started to happen again, and almost the exact same moment he started to snore. This time the blind started to wave, as if wind was coming in from the window, which I had moments before confirmed was shut. The window didn't have any leaks, so I laid there as the tapping and blinds moving continued to happen until I eventually passed out. This continued to happen for every night I was there, except for the night we stayed in Kentucky. It continued the night we got back though. When we did get back, tapping started to come from the walls and the door. The last night I was there, I was so tired from this happening I passed out pretty early, only for both of us to be woken up by his dog whining in the living room. She only stopped when we opened the door and showed her that we were the only ones in the room and we were okay. This is the only night where she refused to enter his room and come up to bed with us. I left the day after and had some weird nightmares throughout New England, all the way up to New York/Maine. I can tell those too if you use the story and people want to hear about it. He said he never heard anything minus that one time with the window and the dog, and still hasn't mentioned anything weird since. Guess I want to hear those stories. I actually emailed them back and asked, so if and when they send me those, I will do a part 2. But don't investigate the knocking. Never investigate the knocking. Did you guys know that Midsummer's Eve is a very important day to the Fae? I did not know that. I don't know much about Fae other than my own experiences, so this was so intriguing to learn. But it is believed by some that Midsummer's Eve is the day that the Fae come out and do the things that they need to do. And on the island of Gotland in Sweden, it is very widely believed that the Fae are all around. So let's talk about a follower's first-hand experience here with one on Midsummer's Eve. So they're minding their business, just strolling through the woods, trying to find a good meditation spot. They've got their divination tools. They are ready to go. And they describe themselves as being easy to spot anyways. They have a big bright aura. They have a big personality. They're just genuinely, people are just drawn to them. So if the Fae was going to notice anyone, it was this person anyways. So they're going through blueberry bushes trying to find the right spot. Literally sounds like the scene of The Prettiest Movie, and they're listening to like the locusts and bugs around. But as they get deeper and deeper into this spot, the buzzing turns to humming. Pretty soon they're like, I don't think that's bugs. And it starts surrounding them and getting louder and louder, and they bolt. They described feeling like they were hypnotized as they walked deeper into the woods, and they just knew something was not right at that point, and it stopped as soon as they got out of there. No one else was around for miles. It was just them. Well, at least no humans were around for miles. Now let's listen to their second story. So where they live now, there is a huge forest that goes on for miles and is very old that separates two cities. There's an old path in these woods that leads to a cliffside where you can sit there, hang out, and relax. Sounds like such a pretty place. Like you just sit there and you watch the sea and nearby cities. It sounds like the perfect place to be. But they said they always feel watched in this part of the woods. Every single time they've went, they just feel watched. If you're thinking, well, why do they keep going back? Did you not hear how I just described how it looks? I would go back too. So on this particular day, they're out there minding their business, just looking at the beautiful scenery, and they hear a man laugh. That would have been creepy enough, but it sounded a bit off. Like, they described it like a broken record of a man laughing, and it was just like repeating and repeating and repeating. It was not a person doing this. There was rock formations everywhere, and they couldn't really see around to see if there was a person, and that made them feel even worse. So they turned around and went back the way they came. Thankfully, that man, voice, whatever it was, did not follow them. They told me about another time that they got lost in this forest and heard a blood-curdling scream. And the same as the first story, they bolted. They knew that they were somewhere that they were not supposed to be, and they had wandered way too deep into the woods. And what makes this even creepier? All of this happened during the day. I love Fae stories. I think those are some of my favorite to receive because they're just so interesting. Now I am gonna go research the Fae in Sweden, so. Sightings of the Michigan Dogman date all the way back to 1887. The first sighting on record is involving two lumberjacks that saw him while they were working. The creature is said to be at least 7 feet tall with the head of a dog and the torso of a man. Sounds like a dog man to me. And on top of that, he either has blue or amber eyes depending on who you ask. And if you're like me, your next question is, what does this thing sound like? Does it howl? What does it do? No. It human shrieks. It screams like a human. There are many, many encounters with this thing, and how lucky are we that one of us right here has encountered him. So let's dive right into this follower's encounter of the Michigan Dog Man. So this follower grew up in the thumb part of Michigan in the rural areas. This experience happened to them last year. Our follower and their boyfriend were just hanging out in the back of their boyfriend's truck at the edge of a clearing. They were getting ready to leave, and our follower looked back and saw a shadow. Just a shadow lurking around outside the truck. And this was miles from everyone. This was such a secluded little area, and something was there. So they look closer, and they're like, that looks like an animal, but a very large animal. So as the chills going up their spine, they climb up to the passenger seat and just choose to ignore it. Our follower also said that at this time, things got silent outside. Never a good thing. So their boyfriend starts to get out of the truck to get into the driver's seat and screams as he falls out of the truck. He starts screaming about something standing that has the head of a dog and the body of a man, and it is massive. He's just screaming this. They speed away, but not before our follower takes one last look, and yep, body of a human, head of a dog. It looked like it was going to chase them, but they were going like 80 out of there, and it just didn't. The whole way back, our follower was seeing shadows along the road and just had a horrible feeling. And that is the end of that experience. That's scary. I didn't know Michigan had a dog man. That was really fun to research. This story occurred in a very small town in Texas. I mean small town. This was a town surrounded by woodland. There was only one paved road, and I think their largest graduating class was 20 people. Small town. One of our followers lived here between the 4th and 5th grade, and they experienced some terrifying stuff. So when you're coming into this town, you go across a small bridge. There's just enough room for a car, there's no walkway. And after you pass that bridge, there's a little clearing with a canopy of trees. While driving with a relative across this area at night, our follower would see things they couldn't explain. They would often see a swing set moving with no wind blowing, and they would see shadow figures all over that clearing. And during the day, if they were nearby there and they were on that swing set, they would hear and see it swing with no one around, and sometimes they would even hear a little girl giggle. They would also feel something tap their back sometimes after this giggle happened, and they thought the little girl was trying to play tag. Like, that is the first thing they thought of. So at this point, they had lived there for about a year, and our follower never really told anyone what they were experiencing. But one night, they were driving across the bridge in the car with their grandfather, and without prompt, their grandfather started telling a story. Our follower has no idea if this story is real or not, but here is the story that was told to them by their grandfather. So one night, a young boy is driving across the bridge home from prom when he sees a little girl in a white dress. She's very pale, appear in front of the car. He gets out to see if she's okay, and she basically says she just needs a ride home and gives him the address. And he gives her his jacket because it's freezing this night. So they pull up to the house, the boy walks up to the door, knocks, and an elderly couple answers. He's like, hey, I don't know if you have a daughter or not, but I just found her by the bridge. She was very cold. She just needed a ride home, and I brought her home. The couple immediately gets very angry with this boy, and they're like, you know, this is a sick joke. It's not funny. Our daughter passed years ago. Not only had their daughter passed years ago, it had actually been 20 years ago to that date, and she had passed in a car crash on that bridge. Confused and kind of on edge, the boy returns to his car and finds the girl and his jacket gone. The next day, he goes to her grave just to visit it and finds his jacket laying neatly on top of it. I feel like a lot of small towns have a story similar like that, and they always are just so very sad to read. I don't know if any of them are true or not, but they are always such a sad read. The Battle of Mill Springs occurred on January 19th, 1862 near Nancy, Kentucky. This battle resulted in around 165 soldiers completely losing their lives and even more going missing. So it's not shocking that this land has a lot of energy behind it and therefore a lot of paranormal activity. One of our followers used to live very close by and shared some of their own experiences at this battlefield. But they are not the only ones to experience things. I went on YouTube and people have captured some weird things here. But let's get into our follower's story. So in 2010, freshly graduated from high school, our follower was attending the local community college and just working a mundane job. So to pass the time in this small town, they and a few of their friends would go to the battlefield at night to just explore, play games, do all that kind of stuff. They would record voices, hear muskets being shot, and see shadows, but nothing other than that had really happened until this night. So one particularly chilly October night, she, her brother, and a few friends decided to meet at the front of this battlefield, and they were just going to go hang out. After a little bit of standing there, her brother decides to walk off into the wooded area. A little bit of time passes and she feels something breathe extremely heavy right beside of her head. She assumed her brother had circled back around to sneak up and scare her, so she turned around really fast and there was nothing there. She then called her brother and saw his phone light up across the way at the wooded area. So they all walked to join her brother, and at this point nothing else creepy had happened. They decide to play a game kind of like hide and seek, where the group split off into two different teams, one hid and one seeked. Salt. Is it salt? The team that our follower was on went ahead and slid off to the side to hide and watched in the distance as the other team's cigarettes lit up at wherever they walked. As they're laying there waiting to be found, they start to notice some shadows moving around ahead of them. They're like, oh, they're about to find us, let's just wait here and see. But they don't find them. As our follower's trying to figure out what these shadows are moving around, a hand snaps her completely out of her thoughts, and it is one of her brother's friends. He had went to the car to grab something and then came back and just ditched the other group and joined this one because he had a little crush on our follower. Our follower starts telling him everything that they're seeing, and he was like, I just came from that parking lot and there were no other cars, so your theory of it being other people is not real. So they watch these shadows and they're kind of moving in repetitive motions, and they don't even know where the other group is at this point. But they know that these shadows are not them because there's more shadows than people. So eventually the brother emerges and the others follow, and they just start telling each other what they experienced because the brother's group also saw what the followers' group saw. They assumed that the shadows moving around were just the other team and had split up to find them, found nothing there when they went, and lost each other. Our followers said there was no negative feelings at all on this battlefield. In fact, there was nothing. It felt still and empty. Maybe residual energy? I don't know. That's terrifying. Today I want to deep dive into what many believe is Connecticut's most haunted restaurant. This beautiful restaurant goes by the name of Twisted Vine. I had a follower reach out to me that used to live close by there because they thought I would be interested in the history and the hauntings, and they were correct. I went into hours upon hours of research of this building, and I'm here to share it with you. So let's go all the way back to 1892 when this grand building was built. Now, it was of course not built to be a restaurant. The old Birmingham National Bank is what this massive building was initially built for, and that is exactly what it was for many, many years. When the bank first opened, they had a president by the name of Edward N. Shelton, who loved this bank. This man loved his job. He took pride not only in his job, but in the bank itself. So it is no surprise that he is believed to have never left this building. And he was not the only one to work at this bank to take that much pride in their work. Some years later, the head cashier by the name of Samuel H. Lessie would actually go on to take his own life after a $2,500 forged check was passed through under his watch. Samuel is also said to have never left this building, and he is blamed for the lights flickering quite a bit. In 1955, the town would suffer a massive back-to-back storm phenomenon that ended in a giant flood. Not many buildings survived this flood, but one that did was the old Birmingham National Bank. So whenever a local cemetery was completely destroyed by this flood, they welcomed those displaced bodies into the basement of the bank. So knowing all of its history, especially the fact that the displaced bodies were kept in this building, it is no surprise that this place has a lot of paranormal activity going on. And it's really no surprise that the most haunted place in the building is said to be the basement. Edward and Samuel are said to come out quite a bit, especially Edward, who is said to love the music. So whenever he hears the music playing, he goes right to the dance floor. Lights flicker all the time, things are tossed around the building, shadow figures are seen, and some of the energy in some of the places is just very heavy in this building. There are some rooms that I read some employees do not like going into. Now, while Edward and Samuel are known spirits that are said to be there, there's also a little girl that is said to stay in the attic. Whether she was misplaced from the cemetery or just the flood in general, she is definitely up there, and employees and visitors alike bring her toys. Twisted Vine does not hide the fact that this is a paranormal hotspot, which I love. I hate it when businesses pretend that there's not other stuff going on. They host paranormal investigations, paranormal dinners. It just seems like so much fun, and I am so excited to visit next year when I am in Connecticut. So if you've been before, recommend me your favorite dish, and yep, that is the history of Twisted Vine in Derby, Connecticut. Our very first story on this series comes from a small town in Michoacan, Mexico. Let's talk about why you should never investigate hearing prayer at night. So this follower said their grandmother told them many horrifying stories when they were growing up, and it was never to scare them, but just to make them be aware. Now in Mexico, it is super common to walk long distances, to give food to the saints for thanks, so it is not uncommon to hear praying outside. But here's the story on why it may not be such a good idea to investigate what you hear. This story was passed down from the follower's grandmother, and it happened to her grandfather's friend. Now this friend was a bit of a busybody. She was always in everyone's business. She had to know everything. So one night she hears praying, and she just takes her entire butt and goes to investigate it. She's met with a giant group of people praying, and she finds it strange, but not strange enough to not go up to them and ask why they're praying. She's told that someone has recently passed, and they're just praying for them. Would she like to join? So she says yes and accepts the bag of food that they give her. After a while, she goes home and goes to bed and doesn't look in the bag until the next morning. Inside the bag, she's not met with food at all. She's met with bones and other things of that nature. I'm trying to watch what I say so that I don't get in trouble on here. This woman, rightfully so, gets very freaked out and decides to go talk to her priest about it. The priest then informed her that she had not been speaking to just regular people at all. She had encountered souls that were trapped in purgatory, and these spirits would not leave her alone unless she returned the bag back to whom she took it from. She was also told that she needed a baby to guide her back to where that spirit was, and obviously no one was going to let her borrow a baby for a few minutes. It didn't take long for this woman to eventually snap, and her life spiraled out of control. She lost her job, and when people around town would see her, she would be screaming. She would be screaming that she needs a baby to take her to the spirits, or the spirits are going to take her. Until one day she disappeared without a trace, and no one ever figured out what happened to that woman. So if you hear someone praying at night, no you didn't. This horrifying legend takes place in Cannelton, Pennsylvania. I think I said that right. But this is the horrifying tale of Barbara Davidson. After the Revolutionary War, a family would settle down on a small piece of farmland. 1795 Cannelton was a very, very small mining town just outside of Pittsburgh. And Barbara was the teenage daughter of Kara and Samuel. One weekend, Barbara's parents set off to go to Pittsburgh to get some supplies, and they left Barbara behind on the farm to tend to the animals as they had 1,000 times before. They're only gone for a few days, and when they return back, they cannot find their daughter. They look everywhere consistently for nearly a week, and they cannot find her. Eventually, something starts to smell a little off underneath their porch, and when they look, they find the gruesome discovery that their daughter Barbara had been shoved in the crawl space. But it gets even worse than that, because Barbara was missing her head. This horribly gruesome crime was never solved, and no one was charged. Locals state that even to this day on Cannelton Road, you can see a fog no matter the weather. But it's not just a fog. In this fog, you will typically see some glowing red eyes. They aren't just floating red eyes though, they are attached to something. They are attached to a pig head, and that pig head is attached to Barbara. Now, where did this pig head come from? Many people believe that Barbara was wandering around looking for her own head and stumbled into a butcher shop and took a pig's head. And now that's what she wears instead of her own. And she is now lovingly known as the Pig Lady of Cannelton. The follower that sent me this story told me that they had visited the road themselves, and it feels off. Like the air is always consistently stale. If you guys have visited this area, please let me know if you've seen anything creepy. I need to visit this place. This hometown horror takes place in an undisclosed location, and I didn't want to pry to get a location because it's a very small town and they probably just want to keep it to themselves for their own safety. But let's get into it. So they start off the story with saying that they have left their love for the paranormal behind long ago because they were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it made their illness a lot scarier to think that what they're seeing could actually be there. But this remains the only story that they could not explain away on their mental illness. Before we get into their experience, let's talk about the very real legend that surrounds their small town. In the early 2000s, a young girl was on her way home from prom and was run off the road by an under-the-influence driver. She would sadly collide with a tree just outside of her father's property and would be pronounced deceased on arrival. Her father was known around the town for making these odd contraptions that were called whirligigs. They were made of metal and would spin in the wind. As a child, the girl would love these. She loved these so much she would always have them, and so the father made a memorial park in her honor just full of these things. So it had all of those, a memorial plaque, and things like that. That park is now a huge tourist destination in their city. So this part of town is nearly abandoned, maybe a few houses here and there, and no one really knows if it's because of the legends, like a little haunted thing going on, or if it's just sad in that part of town because they're remembering this tragedy. Now let's get into their own experience. Around midnight one night, their mom had went to a house party across town. Their mom took their 7-year-old sister with them and noticed pretty quick in that a 7-year-old was really bringing down the mood of things. So she calls her up and she's like, hey, can you come get your sister? And they had just gotten their license and were very excited to go driving, so they said yes. So their mom sends them the address and they put it in, and they notice that the GPS is acting kind of weird on their phone, like it's telling them to go in the opposite direction that it should be. But they were like, oh, okay, I guess my mom got her wires mixed whenever she was telling me where it was, and it's just this way to this abandoned part of town. Maybe there was construction going on that they didn't know about, and they follow the GPS, but soon they realize that they are nowhere near where they need to be. They soon come across the memorial park, and they're just sitting there kind of looking at it. They look down at their GPS trying to figure out what highway they're supposed to get on from here, and the GPS is just telling them to take a right and 0.2 miles. So they follow it thinking maybe one of these houses out here just has a party person in it and that's where they're supposed to be. They go down the 0.2 miles and then turn into a super narrow driveway. They stop with their blinker on and get out their phone to call their mom just to make sure, because this is a very dark area. They see no houses, no lights on in houses. But they look down at their phone and that little SOS at the top is letting them know that there is no way they're going to be calling their mother. They ease off their brakes and continue down the path, just assuming that there has to be a house at the end that they just can't see the lights to. They turn on their brights and scan the tree line, because that's all they're seeing is a tree line. The color of their phone screen turns around, so they glance down to check it, and the GPS is now telling them to turn around. In front of them is now a wide opening in the trees, but beyond that is total darkness, besides what their headlights are lighting up for them. Their phone screen turns off, and they hear a tap on their window. Nope. They feel a rush of adrenaline and then speed into the clearing that was near the trees and turn around. They're noticing as they're driving down this road, it's taking about 3 times the amount that it took to drive up it, which is strange because now they're speeding. But they eventually get to the road and they take off in the direction that they're supposed to be going. When signal was an option again, they call their mom sobbing, telling them what happened. Their mom tells them to just head home to have their grandfather come get their sibling and to just relax. They re-enter the address just to, out of curiosity, and it is now telling them to go the correct way. And their mom makes comment of how strange it is that it messed up like that. So they had to turn around and go the opposite way to get back to their house, which means passing that little narrow road again. So they turn around, and as they're driving past, they glance over, and there is no road. There's no opening in the trees. Nothing is there. Just the forest. We're here to talk about a hometown horror story today, and this one just happens to be in the Pisgah National Forest. And we got pictures. This story's terrifying, so let's get into it. So they and their husband were born and raised around the Pisgah National Forest area, so they're no stranger to hiking, camping, looking at waterfalls, doing all that. This specific story occurred around late autumn one year, so most of the tourists had gone home and the campsites and everything were pretty much open to locals. Around 7 p.m. one evening, they and their husband decide that they are going to go to a campsite just to make some s'mores and enjoy the woods. So they choose a spot to park and start their hike into the woods. They don't go very deep, maybe half a mile. They did not plan to be there long, so really all they brought with them were the stuff they needed for s'mores, no power banks for their phones, no flashlights, and both of their phones were at around 50%. So everything should be fine. But if everything was fine, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So obviously things are about to get real interesting. So this is going to be important for later. For the spot they picked, you have to cross a small river, and the stream flows right over a cliff. And the path to get over the river is pretty narrow, so it's tricky. I wouldn't want to do it in the dark. So they get off their phone to snap some pictures, and they realize their phone is now on 5%. They haven't messed with it at all. suddenly there is no battery left, and their husband's phone is gone. Like it has passed. They're also noticing that it got a little dark a little quickly. Like they looked up and the sun was out, everything was fine, and then there was nothing. So they're like, I'm no longer enjoying my s'mores. I feel like we need to leave so that we can safely get back. And they said it was as if something whispered run in their ear because panic set in. So like I said, they did not bring any flashlights, and that creek was a little bit dangerous, so they needed that 5% battery to use that flashlight to get over the creek. So they pack up everything and swiftly head out of the area where they were and back through the trails. So they tell their husband, I feel like something did not want us there. And he's like, I agree. No, I definitely agree with you. I felt it too. They get almost to the car and their husband stops. And they just hear their husband say, look, this area is known for lightning bugs. Like there are people that come just to see the bugs. So if you live there, you know what a freaking lightning bug looks like. You know what a bunch of them look like. They look around and they are surrounded by lights, but not lightning bugs. It looks like eyes everywhere. So they take off to the car, make sure the windows are up, they lock the doors, and they get out of there. They plug up their phone pretty quickly because they remembered they took some pictures and they wanted to see if they caught anything weird because the whole experience was just odd. And they did. So I'm gonna show you the picture without it being circled and then show you the circled picture, and I'll just let you decide. Also, the Pisgah National Forest is severely haunted. There's a lot of weird things that happen there that I'm going to make a whole video about later this week, but it is a very infamously weird place. This hometown horror story takes place in Cape Town, South Africa. Now, this story comes from the follower's father. They were way too young to know what was happening at the time. Their father used to take their dog and their neighbors' dogs on walks before work every morning, and he would typically take them on walks up Table Mountain. Table Mountain is absolutely beautiful, and it got this name because it's very flat at the top and resembles a table. But it is a very famous tourist destination and a hiking destination. But on top of that, it is said to be very, very haunted. And if you guys want to deep dive into that, I looked into it a little bit because I was curious. I read this story and I was like, I wonder if anything else weird has happened there, and it has. And I read so much, so if you guys want to deep dive, I got you. Anyways, back to the story. So all of the dogs that he would typically walk were very well behaved, and on top of that, they really didn't get scared of anything. That's going to be very important in a second. So anytime he hiked these trails, there was always one specific part that left him feeling a bit off. It was really dark, so much so that he had to use a light because the trees would block out all of the light on this specific part. So now he's walking these dogs one day and he's at this part, and the feeling is a bit worse. It is intense dread in his whole body, in his mind. Something is wrong. And on top of him feeling this, all of the dogs begin to tuck their tails and start whining. And then out of nowhere, his light goes out. These dogs lose their mind. They are running around and barking. They are trying to tell him something is coming. The dread grows in his stomach so bad that he is now becoming physically sick. He starts to get him and the dogs out of there when he feels a tap on his shoulder and a breath in his ear. The light then suddenly turns on and he gets out of there with the dogs. The dogs are safe. Everyone's safe. For reference, they said that this town is typically not windy, so that breath in his ear is a bit alarming. So what do you think their father encountered? Nothing positive, I'll tell you that. This follower wrote in to tell me the story of a piece of land their family recently got in Huntsville, Arkansas. There was a project going on this land before their family got it, and everyone dropped the project and left. Like in the middle of the project, left. So the land had water and electricity running to it, but just the houses had not been built yet. About a month after they get there and move in, strange things start happening. There was weird noises, things would go missing, and it happened so much that our follower decided... Sorry about that. One of my cats jumped up to the top, and they're fine, but they landed up there very loudly. Anyways, things were happening so much that our follower decided to look up the address and found out that this land was actually indigenous land. Pretty soon after this, their brother started to hear his name being called from the woods. And then after that, knocking began happening repeatedly on the door. So one night they had their friend over and they decided to sleep outside. And sidebar, I read that and I was like, why would you sleep outside with all of that activity happening? And then I remembered that I grew up on a very haunted piece of land myself, and me and my friends did that all the time. Like, we would sleep outside we would get pillows and blankets and just put them in the back of my dad's truck and just sleep in the middle of a hayfield. So I get it. So anyways, they're outside trying to fall asleep and they start hearing a noise. Like, it sounded like something trying to imitate an animal-like noise, but they just didn't get it completely right. Then things went silent. Everything stopped around them. And then the followers said they heard a noise that they couldn't even put into words, and they bolted back into the house. That following winter, they would actually find some pretty strange footprints in the snow. Much like that noise, it was just almost human, but something was off. Something was trying its best, but like it was not trying hard enough because you could tell. I don't understand why Jinx won't just pick like up or down, but we're probably gonna hear that noise a lot. I think she has zoomies, so she's like jumping around. They also wanted me to remind you guys to keep your blinds closed at night because one night they didn't and they came face to face with something that they shouldn't have. For this hometown horror story, we are going to be traveling to Memphis, Tennessee to a very haunted museum. This is going to take place in none other than the allegedly very haunted Woodruff Fontaine House Museum. Now, this follower actually took a school trip here when they were around 12 years old at sometime in October for Halloween because it's allegedly very haunted. It's actually said to be haunted by a spirit that goes by the name of Molly, and if you guys want me to do a deep dive into this place, I am so down because the little bit that I read is so interesting. So just a little bit of backstory because this is about to be very important to the story. This follower had a digital camera that they charged up the night before. Like, they did not turn this camera on until they were inside of the museum. Now, this house is huge. It's around 3 stories high with a basement cellar situation going on, and each floor is connected by this staircase that winds around. And I just wanted to include a picture so you knew the layout, you knew what was happening. So this follower said that pretty much the entire tour, they were in the back because they were trying to take pictures of everything. The artwork that was in there, the vintage clothes, the vintage furniture, they wanted it all documented. And by the time they got to the second floor, the follower was very far behind because there was so much to take pictures of. And pretty soon they look around to see that they are the only ones left on the entire floor. So they're looking around and they notice a room on the opposite side of the staircase that's particularly dark except for a window that's inside of there kind of lighting it up a little bit. So for some reason they just pick up their camera and decide to snap a picture of that room. They check the charge and it's at 90%, which is about right. There was enough light in the room that you should have at least seen shapes, but for some reason the pictures were coming out green, like kind of like it switched to night vision. Without focusing or zooming at all, the camera zoomed in and focused on a particular mannequin. This mannequin in particular was wearing a very vintage ballroom gown. They immediately put their camera down and just go off to join the rest of their class. They pull their camera back out a bit later to take some pictures, and it is now on 15% battery life, which does not make sense. They said they know that it could have just been a problem with the camera and nothing else, but that feeling that they got when that picture zoomed in on that mannequin was not normal. And you know, with supernatural things messing with technology, it's pretty common for your battery to be completely drained. Spooky. We're going to talk about an absolute nightmare fuel farm located in Australia. On this property where one of our followers lives sits a very old house, which they've affectionately dubbed the old house. That's so funny because like the house on my parents' haunted farm we also call the old house. They and their brother spent most of their childhood roaming around and exploring the farm and the old house. It was super common for them to just spend all day just out exploring. Now this old house was very much intact, and that's surprising because no one had lived in that house since World War II. One day they and their brother were just spending the entire day with a few friends that were there picking some fruit and exploring the farm. Eventually they decided to go to the old house. They slid under the fence, dodged the cows that were kept in the little fence around the house, and went inside. They parted ways and gathered old bottles and other things that they found around the house, and then gathered back on the kitchen floor to show each other their treasures. Now, this day was very hot and not windy, but as they were gathered on this kitchen floor looking at all of their bottles, they felt a cold breeze shoot through the house. It went into the living room, right to them into the kitchen. Our followers started to feel like they were being watched and got up to look at the window and found that a bull was staring eye to eye with them through this window. They started feeling like they needed to run. But the problem is, that bull was blocking one door and the other exit was down a really creepy hallway that no one wanted to do. So they stayed a bit longer. They start to take note that at this point nature has gone completely silent and the usual noisy birds that never stop chirping had stopped. Like I said, they're hearing no sounds, so tell me why anytime they look back up at this bull, it is closer. It is getting closer to the window without making any noise. Eventually, the bull's face was pressed against the window, and it was not blinking, just a stare. This bull didn't move once while they were looking at it. As soon as they looked away, the bull would move closer. They all started to get the gut feeling like they were prey, and they needed to get out of there. The friends all got up at the same time and took off down the hallway, out that back door, outside, over the fence, and away. They said the entire time, even inside the house, they felt like they were being chased. They didn't go back to that house for years after this happened and still get really uneasy even being around it. The story begins with our follower's cousin and grandmother just chatting one night. They're talking about how they need to go into the village and get something, but they are going to wait until morning, until daylight, to leave the house and do so. So the lights were out in their house at this point. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it was a storm or something else, but they were using flashlights to see each other. So our follower spoke up and said, "Hey, take my flashlight. I'm about to go to bed anyways. Go on into the village and get what you need." They both turn and look at our follower with complete horror on their face and exclaim, "You would have to be out of your mind and not value your life to go down this road at night," which throws our follower off quite a bit. So this road is cut by a water path, and there have been numerous stories passed down for generations about this road and this water path. There is a legend of an entity that will lure you into the water and trap you with just their voice, especially men. They say if you have an encounter with, pretend that you did not hear or see anything. If you're unlucky enough to see her, don't look her in the eyes and don't look at her reflection in the water. If you're out walking at night and you see a light shining and you cannot confirm the source, don't follow that light ever. If you must walk this road at night, always stay in a group of 3 or more people and remember that children can sense and see her. There are numerous stories of people going walking on this road at night and either not returning at all or not returning the same. Our follower shared 2 of those stories with me, and I'm going to share them with you. They are quite disturbing. The first story involves a man who was walking from his farm late one night down this road. The area was pitch black and he was quite nervous, but he decides just to keep going. He focused on ignoring everything around him, is reciting verses, and just focusing on ignoring everything as he gets across this bridge. Once he got past the bridge, he let his guard down a little too quickly. And then he heard it, what sounded like a child crying out for help. He turned his head and body slightly towards the source of the crying, but immediately snapped out of it, turned back, and walked away. But on his walk home, he's noticing the half of his body that he turned is getting colder and colder. He gets home, checks himself in the mirror as he is shivering from just one side of his body and notices that half of his hair is completely gray. He knew he could never go back, and his brothers took care of the farm after that incident as he never returned. The next story involves a child and that child's uncle. So they're walking by the water, they don't need to cross it, but they are close enough to hear a child crying for help. The child could see the source of the voice because remember I told you that children could see, and he confirmed that it was not a child, it was an older woman. The child said, "There's an older woman standing at the edge of the water and her voice is hurting me." The uncle started walking towards this woman, but the child backed up and went away from her, terrified. The child returned home alone and informed the family that the uncle was helping a woman by the water and he was still there. The uncle would never return home, and that next morning, the child had no memory of seeing this woman. Our follower asked their cousin and grandmother for more stories, but they said at this point the air was getting pretty thick, and they were informed that talking about this woman can invoke her energy. So they just went to bed, and on that note, I am going to end this video because I don't want to invoke that energy. I have no idea which town this was located in. They didn't tell me and I didn't pry because I assumed maybe it was a small town and they didn't want it out there, but I hope you guys enjoyed this hometown horror. I received a follower story from Waverly Hills Sanatorium, which is one of my most anticipated haunted locations to visit. And if any of you guys have visited and have some advice for someone who's never visited, leave that in the comments because I am pumped and plan on going this year. So this follower and their friend decide to take a guided tour of Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and the guide is telling them all about the creeper that roams around these grounds. Of course, they told them more stories, but that is the relevant one to this situation. So the guide is telling them all of the terrifying things that have occurred here, that have been sighted here while they are walking around taking pictures. Well, when they get back to their car after the tour, they start looking through those pictures, not expecting to have caught anything. But they notice that they caught this picture. This person said they are no stranger to paranormal things. They've seen the Hat Man countless times. They've had stuff fly around off their desk, but this was probably terrifying to see regardless. Getting, like, just picture evidence of something is a feeling like no other. It is so scary. In this picture, she said, and I also agree, you can tell that it's not a person's shadow because there's no legs. It's as if they're floating. They said ever since that night, they have had more paranormal experiences and have had bad luck, and they think something definitely attached to them that night. If they've tried cleansings and things that, you know, just haven't worked, they may have to do some sort of cord-cutting ritual because, I mean, that doesn't feel great. That doesn't have the best feeling with it. So, you guys read that title right. Is this a werewolf story we're about to read? Let's get right into it. They sent 3 stories. I'm gonna start off with the werewolf one, but the other 2 are also very horrifying, so stay for those as well. These are all taking place in Tri-Cities, Washington State. Our follower's grandfather lived on the side of Badger Mountain that separates his little community from the rest of the Tri-Cities. Large fields can be seen on the tops of these hills stretching for miles and miles, and they kind of dip down to create canyons. About 2 hours horseback from his house sat a well, and he would go sometimes and check on it. So this just happened to be one of the days that he was taking the 2-hour journey to check on the well. So as he's walking back this day, he's scanning the tops of the hills, which is not abnormal. This is something he always did. And his eyes catch something just on top of one of the hills. A black wolf, maybe? Kind of looked like a black wolf, except for the fact that it was massive. There is no way that this thing could have been a wolf. So he keeps looking at it, and upon further inspection, this thing is standing on its hind legs. And not only that, it is looking directly at him. So he gets off of his horse, picks up his dog, and just walks calmly back to his house. And as far as I know, it left him alone, and that was, you know, the end of that experience. But holy crap, that's scary. Even if it was a wolf man, my blood pressure would have been through the roof. They didn't say, but I do wonder if he had had experiences with this thing before because he just knew to be so calm, or if it was just like a primal instinct. I don't know. It's interesting though. This next story occurred in the Alphabet Houses, and if you are like me and had no idea what that is, let me give you a little history lesson first. Alphabet Houses were built in World War II to combat the housing crisis because there was a military base very close by. So these buildings are very old and have a lot of energy. So these buildings have a basement, and on top of that they are 2 stories, and this occurred to our follower's cousin, who was just innocently walking into her bedroom one day and just got a real bad feeling. So upon entering her bedroom, her eyes immediately went to her window, and she was met with something that I am sure she'll never forget. At her uncovered window was a very large humanoid face staring at her, so she ducked and got away from it. Her bedroom was on the 2nd floor. This last story sent absolute chills down my spine, and I actually considered making it its own video just because it's very intense, but let's get into it. So one day our follower sister decides to go to Twin Sisters Rock to hike. I did a little bit of deep diving into Twin Sisters Rock, and I don't want to tell the whole story. I feel like it's not my story to tell, but there is a lot of indigenous folklore surrounding it, and it's seen as sacred to many people. I do encourage you guys to go look it up and read from people who know way more about it than I do. So her sister is on this hike, and she just happens to look down and notices there is a beautiful rock that she thought she had to have. So she picked it up and she put it in her pocket. When I read this, I was clutching my pearls so hard. I was like, please put the rock back. Don't take the rock. But she takes the rock home. I know. Things seem fine. She goes to bed, but wakes up not too long later to her very calm, cool, and collected dog growling at her door. Between growls, she can hear that there is a pretty consistent knock happening. It sounds a little something like this. All 3s. The tapping moved from the door to the covered window, and this dog lost his mind, was barking, howling, freaking out. I mean, it was bad. The knocking then started to spread all around the room, and they described it as if something was laying on top of the house and was just like clockwork going around each wall at the top of the house, at the bottom of the house, just messing with her. And the whole time, it was maintaining that 3. Their sister put together that it was probably the rock, and as soon as they put that like 2 and 2 together, it stopped and they could hear the crickets again. I didn't ask, but I really hope they took that rock back. I really hope they didn't keep the rock. This person's dad grew up in a very small town in Kentucky. He moved out of that town, but they and their entire family recently moved back. And this town has a weird little plot of land, like half-acre plot of land that everyone is just terrified of. And for good reason, because apparently everyone that has set foot on this little half-acre of land has had a weird experience that they couldn't explain. So I'm here to share with you what happened to our follower's dad when he was a teenager. So one night, he and his friends just get a wild hair and decide to go visit the local cemetery, which happens to be inside this half-acre of land. But they go anyways. So they get there, they're kind of like in the middle of the cemetery, just sitting and relaxing. They hear a loud noise, like a bang type noise, and they turn around to the tree line because that's where the noise sounded like it came from, and they are met with a floating light. Floating light that was not there prior. The banging sound did not stop, it got louder and louder as the light inched closer to them. At this point, he is paralyzed in fear. That man is not moving, he is locked on this light. So they start slowly walking away back to their van, and this banging keeps getting louder. By the time they get back to the van, it is extremely loud, and he turns to look where the light was. This one light has now turned into several lights, and they have spread out, and they are coming straight for them. Again, he finds himself absolutely frozen in fear right outside of the van. His friend grabbed him and they got into the van, and as they were pulling away, they saw that the lights stopped right where they were sitting in the middle of the graveyard. Banging stops and the lanterns seem to dissolve away. No one can explain what they experienced, but it traumatized their father. He claims that if he were to ever hear that specific noise again, he would instantly know what it was. And apparently their dad has even more intense stories that he said he is not comfortable sharing until they move out of this area again, and I need to know the stories. I need to know. I was born in Northeast Tennessee, and I still live very close by in Southwest Virginia. I was sent a story that I have not read yet because I wanted to live react to it, and the title is True Story, Thing in the Woods, Northeast Tennessee. Let's get into it, shall we? So I'm wondering if you've heard much about benevolent entities. I'm pretty sure I know one. I forgot all about it until I moved back into my parents' home a few years ago. I moved out a few months ago, and the memories are starting to get foggy, so I feel like that's part of it. I remembered it within a week of coming home, and all the memories came back as strong as if they just happened. I grew up in that house, I played in those woods almost every day as a child, and there was always some sense of something watching. Not in like a malicious way, but it always felt very neutral. Sometimes it could get very intense, but the only time I felt anything like fear when dealing with it was when I was out when I shouldn't be, like sneaking out at night, when grounded, or the 2 times that I looked directly at it. Like I said, I grew up here. I know what the local wildlife looks like. It's a small town. I know the people here and they know me. This thing does not like being looked at, and I'd like to respect its privacy and not describe it if that's okay, because I don't think it would like it. Trust me, it's definitely not local wildlife. It's not a human person. I looked at it once when I was a little girl and didn't know any better. It growled at me and scared me, so I ran. It didn't follow, but I could feel it watching as I left. It watched me more closely for a long time after that, but eventually things went back to normal. The second time I looked directly at it was as an adult when I moved back home. It growled, and I apologized when I looked away. I walked to my car and went about my business. I could feel it watching for maybe a week before things went back to normal. The reason I think the thing in the woods is potentially benevolent is that there's no predators in those woods. People keep chickens in their yards. There's no wolves, bears, or coyotes. Nothing bigger than a house cat lives out there in the wild, and people's dogs get a taste for fresh chicken tend to go missing. And one time a predator moved out here. Nothing concrete, nothing proven, but everyone knew what that man was, and all the kids were warned not to ride bikes near his house. 6 months later, he was gone. If anyone knows what happened to him or where he went, they're not talking. Could be county justice. I think it's the thing in the woods. Predators don't live in those woods, at least not for long. I definitely agree with that. I don't think everything that's in the woods really wants to hurt people. There's definitely more than one thing, and I think some things just want to protect the woods. There's definitely spirits that their main focus is to protect the land, and I think that's probably what this is. Probably doesn't want you looking at it and invading its privacy, but it's not really there to do anything to you. It's there to keep you safe as long as you're taking care of the land. We have a cryptid story to read today, and this takes place in Stardust Ranch, Arizona. If you've ever heard of Stardust Ranch in Rainbow Valley / Buckeye, Arizona, do I have a story for you. A little background, Stardust Ranch is located in a small town called Rainbow Valley just south of the city of Buckeye, west of Phoenix. Literally, middle of nowhere desert scenery. This ranch is known for paranormal phenomenon. The owners claim that there's a portal to an alien dimension. Growing up between the ages of 7 and 13, I lived on the street behind the ranch, but just far enough to be safe from anything, but not safe enough from the sightings. There was a weekend night in July where I was around 9 that I had a sleepover with my friend from elementary school. We decided to sneak out of the house to go soap my neighbor's fountain as a prank. Devious. My neighbors are closer to the ranch than I was, so soap in hand, we left the house at around 1 in the morning. We hopped the fence and started pouring soap into their fountain when we saw a strange light in the sky just hovering kind of low over the ranch. We got curious and went to go see what it was. When we got too close for comfort, we saw a spherical orb of like white-yellow light in the middle of a dirt field. It was on the ranch, and directly below that light we saw what I can only make out to be as a giant, skinny, decrepit, looked like it was deathly ill man with a big head. It was walking around in like a weird zigzag pattern in the dirt before it walked towards the house on the ranch. We thought since it was walking away from us that we were safe to head back to my house. As we turned, my friend tripped on a plow attachment and it made a loud metal clack as soon as it smacked the tractor. Immediately, I told her to run, go back to my house. We crossed the fence back onto my property and I looked back to see this orb/sphere thing slowly approaching the tractor. I ended up screaming and I ran as fast as I could into my window, shut it as fast as I could, and closed the curtain. From below the curtain, you could see a faint light outside of the window, and me and my friend were just hugging, scared out of our minds, crying silently. It took about 10 minutes before the light faded from my window, and that's when I realized we'd left the bottle of soap by the fountain. Thank God we agreed to wait until morning to go back. Morning came and we went to grab the soap bottle so that we wouldn't get caught from soaping the fountain. I, by myself, because my friend was too scared to, went to see if anything was left in the dirt from the night before. As I got closer to where we were standing last night, I saw the owner of the ranch out there yelling on the phone about something that I couldn't hear. My friend called my name and told me she found the soap and if we could please go back inside. Her mom came and got her at around noon. I didn't see or talk to her for the rest of the summer. When we returned to school, I saw her and asked if she wanted to come over and do homework. She told me she's not allowed to hang out with me anymore because when she got home, she told her mom. Her mom told her to stay away from me and my house. That wasn't the only encounter with a UFO or with Stardust Ranch in general, but it was the scariest one I had because I actually saw what I thought was an alien and was chased. Ugh. What's going on with the ranches out there, y'all? Y'all gotta get that checked. Exactly. Thank you, Ava. My second story happened around 6 months ago. I believe I only survived because I watched your TikToks and learned the rules. I helped someone. I also hate that they had to go through that, but I helped. I, now 27 years old, live in Tucson. Kind of near the outskirts of the city, though. We don't have trees, but we do have a lot of cacti and desert bushes as well as desert wildlife. I was driving home at night when a coyote crossed the road right in front of my car. As I passed the coyote, I looked in my rearview mirror to see if I had hit it or if it was safely made it to the other side of the road. It's not uncommon to see passed away coyotes on that road because on either side is open desert. But what I saw wasn't anything I've ever seen a coyote do. The coyote stopped in the middle of the road, stood on its back legs, and stared in my direction. I continued to drive at my same speed as I was originally going, avoiding looking in the mirrors on either side of the road, just trying to stay calm. I thought to myself that I didn't see what I saw. I'm tired. I'm seeing things. But I made it home to my house and got out of my car. As soon as I did, I heard, "Mommy?" in my daughter's toddler voice from behind me. My daughter was at my in-laws' house 2 hours away. It wasn't her. I didn't look back and I walked into my house through the garage door and closed the garage. I heard knocking coming from the window and walls in my daughter's room. Her room is by the garage in the front of the house. I was alone in my house, and in my bedroom near the back of the house, I closed my bedroom door. I have blackout curtains thumbtacked to the corners of the wall in the front of my bedroom window, so I knew I couldn't look out the window even if I wanted to. I put in my headphones as well and was turned on my TV. I put on some YouTubers playing a game to help ignore the sound. When I woke up in the morning, I was in a dazed state, kind of telling myself, did that really happen last night or did I just dream it? Luckily, I asked my friend who lives on the nearby Navajo res to come to my house and I told her what had happened. She did a small ritual/cleansing of my house and myself, and I haven't had a strange encounter since. I'm not sure if what I encountered that night was a walker or a changeling, but I don't want to risk it. You don't have to share these stories if you don't want to, but if you do say anything, please tell your followers this. Please, if anyone is experiencing anything similar to what happened to me, if you have any connections to traditional natives nearby, please contact them. They've been dealing with these things way longer than we can imagine and might be able to protect you as well. Always follow the rules of the night. You don't have to live in the mountains to experience cryptids. They're everywhere. That last line was chilling and very true. This can happen anywhere, and it does. They don't just stay in the mountains. Buckle up, because we have a paranormal encounter captured in a picture and on an audio recording. So this comes from a follower who is on her dad's paranormal team that is based out of Michigan, and boy do I bet they stay busy in that state. So I'm going to read you the story because I feel like she tells it better than I could, and then we are going to look at the pictures and listen to the audio. Every year, the team has hosted a public hunt at the Howe Historic Theater. This theater is very well known in the area for being a great place to catch a movie, but also for the spirits that reside. All the spirits here are very kind and just like to keep to themselves, but there is one spirit that everyone is most excited about, Pete the Lion. Pete the Lion was said to be on a traveling circus around the late 1890s to early 1910s, and for whatever circumstance, he passed away due to illness, old age, or an injury, and the circus buried him behind the theater. Before the theater was a movie theater, it was where people could watch plays and things, so they have catwalks, and that is where Pete hangs out. Pete is either active or not, he gets to choose. But we think he doesn't know that he passed on, as one of the first times my dad and his team ever saw him was when he was hunting one of his team members. We'll call her Jill. So Jill was sitting at the bend of the aisleway where people could walk to find their seat row. Jill was at the end and on the stage in front of the screen. They were trying to get Pete to just show himself, and my dad looked to about the middle of the aisle to see this big shadow about the size of a lion. 4 foot high, 6 feet long. And it just bolted towards Jill. All he could get out was, "Jill, look," before it pounced above her and disappeared. Now Jill saw it too, and screamed. She thought it was just one of the team members rushing at her, but everyone was sat down. Now that just proved to my dad that there was indeed a lion. And so on the next public haunt they did, they were talking to Pete, teasing him, and nothing happened, so they moved on to the next. And all you can hear is a lion greeting. If you search up what it sounds like, it sounds very identical. My dad rushed out to the alley to look at the street, and there were no cars. Heating was not on, so it had to have been Pete. My dad was encouraged to kind of teasing him to get him out. The next time he was saying stuff like, "Well, Pete, if you were real, then you would step out in front of me on my trail cams and show yourself." They laughed and moved on with the hunt. Well, at the end of that night, my dad was taking down his trail cam, and with his trail cam, they caught 3 pictures, and in 2 out of 3 of the pictures, you can see what seems to be the face of a lion over his shoulder. That's so weird. So my cat's like chasing something, but there's nothing. There's literally nothing. I thought they were playing, but it's only one cat doing it. I'm gonna pretend that's not happening. They went back into the theater and made sure it wasn't anything that could have made that happen, and it wasn't. So Pete really did show himself. There are so many stories about this theater, but I thought it would give you a cute story to read, and you'll hear my dad talking in the video.
You're going to hear me talking, and right around 4 seconds is when it starts. And it kind of goes, and then everyone's like, "What was that?" And I was like, "What the hell was that?" And people are like, "I think it was a roar." And so here, I'll play it.
Yeah, none of them usually perform on command, but we listen while we're
What the heck?
What was that?
Well,
Enjoy that little wholesome story because I don't do those often. So this person has lived in rural England their entire life, and they grew up hearing the stories of local forests. However, they and their siblings were outside in the woods consistently as kids and never had weird experiences. So can you really blame them for not believing in the tales? Well, recently, some events have happened that have made them question whether or not they should believe in this folklore or not. So there's 3 siblings. One of the followers' siblings bought a house that is surrounded by local forests. Well, the follower and another sibling go to that house to help their other sibling move in, and as soon as they're there just kind of helping, they start hearing a high-pitched whispering noise. The follower and the sibling helping, not the one that had moved in. Well, that sibling leaves, and the follower stays the night with the one who just bought this house to help with the kids. So the follower gets up, goes in the kitchen to grab some tea, hears some whispering, kind of ignores it because that happened earlier, comes back in, and the one who just bought the house is like, "Why are you whispering if you're in another room? Like, what good is that doing anyone? I can't hear you." And then they proceed to say what happened earlier that day with the other sibling in them. While they were in the kitchen getting the tea, they also saw something strange on all 4s outside of the kitchen window. window. And they thought nothing of it, chalked it off to like a fox or a deer, and ignored it. But whenever their sibling's son comes flying out of his bedroom to announce that he hears a woman screaming outside, they can no longer ignore what is happening outside. So they take a torch, go outside, and see glowing eyes in the tree line that is attached to that thing that the followers saw earlier on all fours. Definitely looks more like a deer now, and they approach it even more, trying to get it to run away, because if you know anything about deer, they do not like confrontation unless it's with car headlights. So they approach it, and instead of running away, this deer just goes up on all fours. Just looking at them up on all fours. So they're like, okay, I guess this is your land. I'm just gonna turn around and go back to the house. So that happens. The next morning, they take the siblings' dog out for a walk. This dog is a Saint Bernard, not scared of anything, went to America, squared up with a bear, like does not care about anything. So this dog should be fine in this creepy forest. Well, they don't get very deep in before there's an off-filling. Our follower expresses this, and they're both like, it's probably just from last night. We're just a little sketched out. Not too long after they have this conversation, the St. Bernard bolts. Whatever's in these woods is scarier than a bear. We get out to the edge of the woods, hear the whispering begin again, and they bolt too. Nothing else has happened with the adults, luckily, but as far as the little boy goes, he did not get so lucky. Every single night, he runs out of his bedroom to go tell his mom that this deer is circling his window and he can't get it to stop. I have a very creepy story from the Philippines to bring to you today. I was only around 7 or 9 at the time, I can't remember. I used to live somewhere near the forest, like my house, and then next to it was a forest. My grandmother and father reminded me time and time again to never stay far too late in the forest and that I should always be back by sundown. And so I was playing alone, picking up flowers around Mom to turn into a little flower crown, and I was playing along the stream, and I noticed that it was getting dark. Too dark. So I sped walked all the way home, but every time I rounded the corner where my house was supposed to be, it was never there. So from speed walking, it became running, and from running became frantic screaming until it was so dark that I just gave up. I sat on a little log where I had been before it was dark, and then I heard something. The sound of hooves grinding on rocks, and that's when I knew that I had completely messed up. While I was running, it had never really occurred to me what I had encountered. I was in a loop. And that meant only one thing. So back to me. I was on the log frantically but quietly muttering for my dad to come get me. I was rocking myself back and forth, hugging my legs and sobbing. Only a few minutes after that, I snapped out of it. My dad was trying to wake me up. He did everything he could. He sprinkled salt on the windows, locked the doors, and turned the blinds. He told me that when it got a little too dark, he went looking for me, and what terrified him the most was when he said he found me at the backyard scratching myself in a fetal position. I was laughing hysterically with tears streaming down my eyes. After that, we moved back into the city, only ever returning to visit my grandparents. To this day, I still have nightmares about it, dreaming what would have happened if my dad hadn't found me. That is one of the scariest things I've ever read. Like, those movies, like Brightwood and Triangle, that you get stuck in a loop are the scariest movies to me. So the fact that it happens, nope, I'm good. Does that happen here? Is that just a Philippines thing? Does that happen here? Someone tell me, does that happen here? So what happens when you take a very haunted abandoned building and turn it into a very populated, not abandoned building? You get a haunted building that's populated. The ghosts don't just go away. So today we're going to talk all about the Grand Traverse Commons, which is formerly known as Traverse City State Hospital in Michigan. 1885 through 1989 were the years of operation for this hospital. Most of these buildings, because the hospital was huge, have been converted to apartments, department stores, and things like that, but there are a few abandoned buildings behind. And today we're going to be talking all about some of the abandoned ones. But on the note of some people living in this building, I need stories, because the stories that I bet people have living here are insane, and I need them. But the reason I know about this building, because unfortunately I had not heard about it before, was because one of you sent me your story along with some creepy pictures that you took in this building. And by this building, I mean some of the abandoned ones. So let's look at this first picture that was taken in the men's cottage area. They say the rest of the building was empty and they were minding their own business on their flashlight tour, but you can clear as day see a person standing there. So if it wasn't an alive person. Here are also a few more pictures that were taken in the, I don't know how to word this on here, unalive shoot. You can see a few orbs floating around, so wanted to pop those in as well. And that's all for this hospital. For the next picture that I want to show you, we are going to travel to Seaman Park. Seaman Park is located in Ada, Michigan. It's right near Finlay Cemetery, and forgive me if I'm not saying any of these correctly, but that cemetery is said to be extremely haunted. There are 100-year-old tales in that cemetery of a woman in a white gown that seemingly floats throughout the place. There's also sounds of yelling, screaming, arguing. Well, one night, this follower's just in the parking lot minding their business with their partner. They said they clear as day heard hay, just from the woods, from the cemetery, from somewhere. They didn't see any people. At one point, they were walking around the area, snapped a few pictures, and saw a figure in the trees in one of the pictures. Here's that picture. They said they had walked around that area, there was no one there, and not that it mattered anyways because it didn't look human. In a small town in Australia where really nothing spooky ever happens, it is a big deal when something spooky does happen. So let me tell you about a creepy story that happened in this small town that now everyone knows about, and it centers around our follower. So they were walking to their bus stop, and they said it's usually a boring walk, that nothing really happens, but this time they found a very old doll laying on the side of the road, and for some reason they just felt like they should pick it up and bring it with them. They picked up the doll because they didn't want to ignore the strange feeling, and as they looked closer, it looked like it had real human hair. They put it in their pocket and bring it on the bus with them and show it to their friends when they get on the bus. Now, their friends were very spiritual, and immediately they are like, you shouldn't have taken that doll. There's something not right with that doll. Why did you do that? But the follower ignores this, ignores their warnings of it making them uncomfortable, and took it home with them anyways. They put it on their cupboard, and it sits there for quite some time, but they do take note of the fact that anytime they look at it, they start having some heart palpitations, and it feels like something's just squeezing. They also took note that whenever they were away from their doll at school, they would feel like sharp pokes in their hands, and they didn't even really connect the dots that the doll had 2 nails in both of its arms. Recently, they've been seeing things in the dark corners of their home and out of the corner of their eye. They just see figures in the dark all the time and wanted some advice on it. My advice is that sounds like you picked up someone's craft work and you were not supposed to touch it. That's what it sounds like to me. I would put it back. And I would apologize profusely. If it were me, I wouldn't keep it. That's just me, though. Are there walkers in California? Well, the person that sent me this story definitely thinks so let's get into their experience. So it all started one night when they were on Discord with their friends playing some horror game, and they remember that a character in the game was named after a walker. So one of the friends in the group does not believe in this stuff at all and started cracking jokes, saying the name over and over again, even though everyone was like, hey, don't do that. At the very least, it is bad luck. It's just not really a good idea. But this made them do it more and more. And they did it until something happened. So let's talk about what happened. So while they were playing the games, this friend that was repeating that suddenly went silent and started to explain that something wasn't feeling the best. He felt like something was at his back door, so he got up and went to the back door, and there was a singular cat sitting there, just staring, just unmoving, not blinking, not doing anything, just staring. They said they haven't seen this cat in the neighborhood at all. This was an unknown cat, and it was literally just staying there. He could feel its eyes, right? He eventually goes upstairs, trying to escape this cat's stare, and he stays up there for a few hours and later comes back down in the middle of the night to get a drink. That cat hasn't moved. The cat is still sitting there, exact same spot, hours later. A friend actually turned the camera to this cat so all of the friends could see it, and the follower was like, I'm not looking at that just in case. And I don't blame them one bit, because if it was that, it sounds like that friend kept saying the name over and over, and they heard it and were like, you rang? I'm here. Why are you running away from me upstairs? I am here. So there are stories that take place all around the world that kind of like correlate with Appalachian folklore, and I didn't know Australia had that close of a connection until I read the story that was sent in to me. So let's get into it, shall we? So they said that they grew up in the outback of Australia, and they remember talking to the indigenous people there all about the dream time. The dream time are a collection of stories, they told me, that were passed down by the Aboriginal people of how Earth was created and things like that. There's one specific story that sticks out to them that they were told as a kid, and it was about something called Min Min lights. I hope I said that right. But these are lights that would appear in the outback, and sometimes they would just kind of observe, but a lot of the times they would chase you. They would just take off flying after you. Now, the follower, along with their sister, would grow up to see these lights many, many times. And while the follower moved away to the city, the sister stayed behind, and they're actually still experiencing those lights today. So I want to tell you what happened to their sister recently, that their sister had to call and tell them what happened. It was so crazy. The sister was outside and saw those lights form, and she was like, nope. So she turned around and came back inside, and something started knocking all around the house. Sound familiar? Involving Appalachian folklore? Because that happens a lot here. It was knocking, and then that turned into it shouting out to get her attention, and she looked, and there was absolutely no one outside. She was so convinced that something was outside, she phoned the police to get them to come and investigate because she knew someone was trying to break into her house. But the police showed up, and there was literally nothing there. There was no trace of anyone. So they wrote in to tell me that story. They said they were dealing with their own things going on that they think might be mimic related. They didn't really give me any details as of right now, but I did ask for them, so hopefully I can help them with that. But I thought that story from Australia was just so fascinating because it's really similar. So today I want to share with you a story that was sent in to me that takes place in South Africa, and it takes place in an area where it's just mainly sugarcane fields. So the followers' paternal parents were the first owners of this house that they lived in, and the parents didn't plan on having any kids, but our follower was born around 10 months after their wedding day. So they ended up having kids. So the story starts a little bit later in their life when the followers laying down in their bed drifting off to sleep, and they feel someone start playing with their hair like in a motherly way. Well, they turn over to look at the door that's connecting their room with their mother's, and it is closed and no one is there. So what the heck is touching their hair? But the follower gets up, opens the bedroom door to their mother's room, goes in there and says, hey, were you by any chance just touching my hair? And the mom was like, no, I haven't even left this room. That wasn't me. You were probably just dreaming. So they sell that house to a young couple eventually and move out. And years later, they're just sitting over breakfast, randomly talking about paranormal activity together. And the follower brings up that instance to their mom, and their mom gets a really weird look on her face. The mom says, I feel like I shouldn't be telling you about this, but the couple that bought our house actually contacted me and asked if we had had any weird experiences in the house, because apparently one of them had their hair yanked late at night. This couple was newly married, and apparently they also did not plan on having kids, but shortly after their wedding had kids. And they thought that was really weird that that house happened to create two babies when two babies weren't really planned for. Their father always said the house wants the babies, and that's why babies are born. Do you guys want to hear a creepy story from Guanajuato, Mexico? I know you do, so let's get into it. Now, this story didn't actually happen to our follower, but it happened to our follower's husband, who grew up there on a ranch. He was around 17 at the time when he was walking to his house at night. Keep in mind, the next ranch or house is just about half a mile away, and he was on a narrow 2-foot dirt road. He was outside around 11 p.m. and he was heading back to his house when he heard the sound of a woman's heels walking in front of him. Very confusing sound because no one owned heels on this ranch. All of a sudden, he looked up, and straight ahead on the road to the left side of him was a huge, not like any other dogs on or near the ranch, black dog. He said it was twice the size of a normal German Shepherd, the head at least the height of 5 feet. There was nothing strange about its eyes, like color or anything. They locked eyes and just stared. The hair on his entire body stood up. He said he was frozen with fear but remained calm. They stared at each other for what he felt like was forever, but probably was just a minute. He told me that he was not in fear of the dog itself, but how it made him feel. It made no sound, no growl. It did not bare its teeth, no noise. With eyes still on the dog, he bent down to try and pick up a rock to throw if he needed to defend himself, but could find nothing. The dog just stared and never broke eye contact. After finding nothing, he forced himself to look back at the road and kept walking towards his house. He did not turn around to see if it was following. He said he kept going, and he heard the high heel sound of the dog continuing down the road in the opposite direction. As he got closer to his house, he ran inside and never had an encounter with this dog again. After his story, I looked up a lot of stories and legends and researched Mexican culture, and a lot of articles say that the black dog is related to a foreshadow of demise. I read about hellhounds, which are more common in the British Isle folklore. This is what they found on Wikipedia, and this is what it sounded closest to them, and honestly, it sounds pretty close to me too. Cadejo. The Cadejo is a supernatural spirit that appears as a dog-shaped creature with blue eyes when it's calm and red when it's attacking. It roams around isolated roads at night, according to Central American folklore of indigenous origin. There are different color Cadejos to signify good and evil. Both are spirits that appear at night to travelers. They usually appear in the form of a large shaggy dog, potentially as big as a cow, with burning red eyes and goat's hooves, although in some areas they have more rough characteristics. And they said the reason that they think this might be it is because the goat hooves could sound like a woman's high heels. That is absolutely terrifying. And they encountered the one that was said to be not the best, so sounds like they got lucky. So I feel like we've all heard stories about haunted hospitals that have been closed down and are abandoned and that they're really haunted, right? What the hell is stopping a fully functioning, still open hospital now from being haunted? Because people are still losing their lives, bad things are still happening. The answer is they're definitely still haunted, and I have an example of that in Wichita Falls. The follower that sent me this story said that they've experienced weird stuff driving by that hospital since they were 3. They said around the fence line of that hospital, anytime they drove by, they would just see patients lined up. Like, presumably patients that have lost their lives. They would just be lined up by the fence. And they saw this throughout their life, consistently, right? Well, one day they're driving by it, and there's no one at the fence, which is really weird. And they said, I guess they had their window down, or they didn't, and it was just extremely loud. But they heard a voice come over like a speaker and yell curfew. No one was out there to be yelling to, but this gravelly, growly voice went over and said curfew. And then, right as soon as that happened, they heard from the other side of the road where the woods are, whistling. Curfew from what? Curfew from what? I got sent a story from someone who experienced something creepy in the Scandinavian woods. And it scared me, so now you have to be scared too. So this person was up late one night just watching a movie, and they decided that it was getting pretty late and they should probably go to bed. So they get up and they start going around and doing all of their nighttime stuff, turning off lights, closing doors, all that stuff. So as they start walking past the window that faces the woods inside of their home, they start hearing whispers and very short screams. And they're like, what is that? Look over, realize that they left that window open. So that's not great, right? So they start walking towards the window to close it, and what do you know? The screams get a little bit louder, the whispers get a little bit louder, and then a shadowy figure darts across that window. So they probably lunged forward and just jerked that curtain down, trying to close it. That's what I would do. I mean, I would probably hit the ground with my hand up on the curtain trying to get it down. Please close your curtains at night no matter where you live, especially if you're near a wooded area of any kind.